And I see that Councillor Gower has joined, so I believe that we do have a quorum. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of October 3rd, 2022. I'd like to call the members to order. Members are reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this subcommittee, residents may still make written submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424 extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. Though we are meeting virtually today, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Ottawa is built upon is unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, especially in light that the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was observed last week. We recognize that Algonquin culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa also honors the people and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable contributions to this land. Today, we have received regrets from Member Conforti. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll?
Member Halsell. Member Podolsky.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor McKenney. Member Conforti.
Present.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Vice Chair Quinn.
Here.
Chair King.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you, and apologies to Member Conforti. I had you listed as having sent regrets, but obviously you're here, and it's wonderful that you are here and you're joining us. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. Given the number of items on the agenda today, we'll proceed with the consent agenda. The first item on the consent agenda is consideration of objection to notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This item will be held for presentation and speakers. The next item is designation of 95 Henderson Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Speakers are in attendance on behalf of the applicant. I want to ask those speakers, if the item carries, whether they need to speak.
Chair, I'll just allow the speakers to speak from the attendees.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. John Stewart here. We do not need to speak.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. For the subcommittee, is this item carried?
Chair, I have my hand up, sir. I'm the local councillor wondering, I have questions to staff on the report.
Sure. Are they short or should we hold?
I have two questions. I'm in your hands.
Maybe we should proceed then, just for since it's before us.
Appreciate it. I don't know if Leslie, Ashley, or I see Mackenzie. Okay, there's a number of folks on. Oh, Henry. So I guess my first question is, staff recommended that there'd be some level of preservation of parts of the building, and the report clearly articulates the kind of the going back and forth with the applicant. Yet the applicant did trigger the 60 days. So I'm wondering, with the report that's in front of us, what tools does city heritage and city planning staff have to preserve as much as we can of the characters that are identified in the report?
In this instance, we can rely on the Sandy Hill Cultural Heritage Character Area Guidelines, and that those guidelines do allow for some influence and encouragement from staff to continue pushing for salvage or reuse on site.
Does it require further direction or a direction from this committee relating to layers of protection? Because we've seen a complete build, like a full demo and a full new building. I challenge a bit of the materiality and the shapes and the character that's being proposed. So wondering if there's more teeth from the department in the character elements of their new proposal.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Sandy Hill Cultural Heritage Character Area Guidelines do provide sort of design guidelines for new construction within the character area to ensure that it remains compatible with the character of the broader neighborhood. Excuse my voice, I have a cold. They are non-binding, and because the area is not designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, there is no requirement for the applicant to preserve the building or parts of the building. However, through the planning process, staff would work with the applicant to ensure that the policy that is council adopted is considered and followed through the development process.
Okay, thank you. Last question for me, Mr. Chair. Maybe more to you, Leslie, in terms of planning efforts next term. Obviously, dependent on future councils and future approvals, but I know that we were through a number of reports, including the R4 and including the OP. We've done some work to broaden the heritage window and era. And I just want some reassurances. I know that work needs to be done, particularly in some areas of Sandy Hill, that would not, like from your current expertise, for your current understanding, that there wouldn't be changes to the staff review of this property if those policies were in place.
You're correct, Councillor, that through the R4 study, we received a direction to re-examine the existing 7 HCDs that are east of King Edward Avenue, as well as the remainder of the cultural heritage character area, to determine if the level of protection under the Ontario Heritage Act was sufficient. So that remains on the branch's work plan. It won't be completed, it probably won't start for at least another year, given other workload items. I don't think that this, it's hard to predict whether if this was an HCD, we would have a different opinion. But at this point in time, we do have that on our work plan, and we do intend to reevaluate the level of protection in Sandy Hill based on now about 5 or 6 years of the character area and seeing buildings be removed or redeveloped. And we've had some successes in having them retained and some that have been lost. So it is still on the work plan. I don't think any further direction is needed.
Okay, thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Chair. Sorry for a bit of a longer questions there.
Not at all. Obviously, we always welcome the interventions of our local ward councillors at this subcommittee, and we're thankful for the work that Heritage staff is undertaking to focus a little bit more on these elements as they emerge. So, is this item carried?
Carried.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is application for demolition and new construction at 14 Crescent Road. Speakers are in attendance on behalf of the applicant. If the item carries, do the registered speakers need to speak?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, go ahead, Tamara. Sorry.
Hi, Mr. Chair. We're happy to proceed with consent if there are no questions to the applicant team, at your discretion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other additional comments, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next item is heritage easement agreement for 50 the driveway. There is a technical amendment for this item. Can the vice chair please read the motion?
I'm pulling up the motion in a moment, Chair. Seems to be a slight delay in opening the document.
Yeah, no problem.
The motion reads, whereas the recommendation 3 in the report incorrectly references section 11.9 of the draft heritage easement agreement, and the correct section is 10.9. Therefore, be it resolved that recommendation 3 be amended by replacing section 11.9 with section 10.9.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for introducing that technical motion. There, once again, our speakers are in attendance for this file on behalf of the applicant. I'd like to pose the same question. If the item carries, do the registered speakers need to comment?
Sorry. Good morning, Mr. Chair. It's Tim Chatter from Joe Richards. We're happy to proceed with the staff recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you. So is the motion before us carried?
Carried.
Carried. Is the item carried as amended?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. The next item is 5.1. An item introduced by Member Podolsky, a direction to undertake an evaluation of the heritage value of the former CPR rail bridge over the Rideau River. There is a speaker for this item, so we will hold it. So we will now return to the first item on our agenda for 0.1, consideration of objection to notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So today I will be presenting on the consideration of the objection to the notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue under the Ontario Heritage Act. And next slide, please. So this property will be familiar to most members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. However, just as a refresher, the subject property is 501 Cole Avenue, located in the Highland Park neighborhood. It's located near the intersection of Cole Avenue and Kenwood Avenue, south of the main commercial strip in Westboro. So just on the left there, you can see an aerial view of the site, and to the right are several views from just outside the property. And next slide, please. So I just want to quickly review the events that have led to this report being in front of Built Heritage Subcommittee today. The subject property is listed on the city's Heritage Register as a non-designated property. In the fall of 2021, staff received a request to designate the property from the Westboro Community Association. Once finalized, this request was added to the city's designation request work plan. In April of this year, an application for consent to sever was submitted to the Committee of Adjustment by the current owner to facilitate the development of 2 new single detached houses. A 60-day notice is required to demolish any building listed on the Heritage Register, and the application was adjourned until the 60-day notice period commenced. The formal demolition notice was received on May 9th, 2022, starting the 60-day notice period. Through the city's council-approved procedures for listed building demolition notices, the ward councilor requested that a designation report be brought to Built Heritage Subcommittee. On May 18th, 2022, the severance application was reheard at the Committee of Adjustment and approved conditionally. On June 20th, staff presented a report to this subcommittee on the designation of 501 Cole Avenue. In this report, staff recommended that the property not be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, but Built Heritage Subcommittee instead recommended that the property would be designated under Part 4. And the item rose to Planning Committee on June 23rd and to Council on July 6th, where it was given final approval. A notice of intention to designate the property was issued the same day. Next slide, please. So that quickly covers most of the details leading up to today. But before we go any further, I do want to highlight the process that we're working under, so it's clear what the subcommittee and then council's responsibilities are. So on the screen is an abbreviated graphic illustrating the designation process under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There's a lot of detail on there, but I'll break this down to clarify. So under the current Ontario Heritage Act, there's 2 opportunities to challenge a designation. And today we are working with the first opportunity, which is referred to in the Heritage Act as an objection. So next slide, please. So after a notice of intention to designate is issued, there's a 30-day period for any person to submit an objection to the notice. I've highlighted these steps on the screen. The objection submission must set out all the reasons for the objection, as well as any new information related to the designation in writing. An objection essentially brings the designation back in front of council for a second review. So after the notice of intention to designate 501 Cole was issued, the city received a notice of objection on behalf of the property owner within that 30-day period, bringing the item back to Built Heritage Subcommittee and council. And next slide, please. So this second review is the step in the process we're at today. The act requires that council consider the objection and then decide from 2 options: to proceed with the designation or to withdraw the designation. So this stage is highlighted here on the screen. And essentially council has 90 days following the conclusion of the objection period to decide on the objection, bringing us to a statutory end date of November 4th, 2022. So Built Heritage Subcommittee's role today is to pick between the 2 options and recommend that council either withdraw the notice of intention to designate or recommend that they proceed with the notice of intention to designate. So if council decides to withdraw the notice, the designation is effectively canceled and will not proceed further. The city is also required to issue a notice of withdrawal similar to the original notice of intention to designate. If council decides to proceed, the process continues normally. It's important to note that if council does proceed with the designation, the approval of the designation bylaw is then open to appeals to the Ontario Lands Tribunal. And next slide, please. So this slide just recaps the 2 options. So again, proceeding means that the designation process continues and the designation bylaw is then open to OLT appeals after council approval, and withdrawal ends the process essentially and requires a notice of withdrawal issued by the city. And next slide, please. So now we'll just address the objection in question. So it was submitted on behalf of the property owner by Gowling WLG and outlines 3 reasons for their objection to the notice of intention to designate. First, that the designation of the property is not justified by any study and is contrary to heritage staff's recommendation. Second, that the property lacks design or physical value despite the language set out in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value. And third, that the property lacks contextual value. Heritage staff's overview of the objection is set out in the report brought forward to BHSC today. Staff are of the opinion that this objection received does not provide new or substantive information related to the designation of 501 Cole Avenue. The department maintains the position that designation is not recommended for the subject property as previously recommended. And next slide, please. So this report contains 2 recommendations. The first is a 2-part recommendation prompting council to adopt one of 2 motions, A or B. These motions correspond with the recommendation required today to either proceed with the designation or to withdraw. So motion A directs council to adopt a motion to designate the property and directs the enactment of the designation bylaw. If the subcommittee recommends council proceed with the designation, this is the motion to adopt. Motion B directs council to adopt a motion to withdraw the designation. If the subcommittee recommends that council withdraw the designation, this is the motion to adopt. So just to recap, motion A is if you are intending to proceed and motion B is if you're intending to withdraw. And next slide, please. And then finally, the second recommendation is procedural. It suspends the notice requirements of the procedure bylaw so as to permit the report to proceed to council on October 5th within the statutory timelines required for consideration of the objection. And next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg, for laying out a very comprehensive view of the process here. We did not receive correspondence on this item, but we do have a number of registered speakers, and the first registered speaker is Julie Harris from ContentWorks.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm speaking on behalf of the property owner, but also I just want to say that I've been a heritage professional and public historian for more than 30 years. I'm quite familiar with the architecture of Ottawa, having lived here since 1984. And I worked as an architectural historian for Parks Canada for 9 years, and I'm a former member of the former Conservation Review Board of Ontario. And I continue to do heritage consulting almost full time. And the rest of the time I work on matters related to Indigenous heritage and history. So I want to begin by noting that at the previous meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, one of the members, and I was struck by this, said that heritage seems to be about taste anyways. And I would refute that, but I also think the comment reflected an uneasiness on the part of some board members for designating this property. I'm organizing my remarks in line with the staff report, which supports my analysis of the architectural merits of the property. The house was built by the Pert family or William Pert, the owner, with aspirations to build something of value perhaps, but they did not achieve it. Either because they didn't care enough, and we can never know that, or they did not have the financing necessary to create a good example of the architectural style that they chose. And I draw your attention to the lack of interesting woodwork, the stark symmetrical organization without differentiation of the ground and second stories, the diminutive chimneys, the carpentry, and the simple design of the two-story portico. And so I would agree entirely with staff that there is a lack of design and physical value to warrant designation under this criteria. And I would go further, however, in stating that I continue to believe that the property also lacks contextual value as defined, and not as defined, but as interpreted by the former Conservation Review Board as late as fall 2021. And the lack of sufficient contextual value is evident in the description of the heritage attributes attached to the statement of significance. The only points are a generous front setback and a green front lawn, none of which are requirements for the Cole subdivisions. The attributes do not mention its physical relationship with other buildings, including its neighbors, of which would have to mention about a dozen at a minimum, possibly up to 50. So I would say that it is a risk to designate this building, and I agree, or with this property rather, and I would, I entirely agree with the City of Ottawa's heritage staff in stating that designations of these kinds of buildings, and I've been contacted by many owners of properties on the register, require a fuller study before designation. But even with a fuller study, I believe that this building would not be recommended for designation. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there any questions for this speaker? Seeing none, thank you so much for your deputation today. The next registered speaker is Murray Chowan of Novatech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if the committee coordinator could put up our rather brief presentation. Thank you very much. I want to start by just saying, or referring back to the discussion when this matter was before Built Heritage Subcommittee on June the 20th. One of the members at that time asked a question about what was being proposed to be developed on the property. At the time, staff were unable to answer that question, although the information is provided in the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement that was prepared by Ms. Harris and was submitted in support of the notice of intention to demolish. Next slide, please. So this is an image of the two single detached homes that have been designed by Barry Hoban's office for the redevelopment of the site, replacing the existing single-family home with two modern single-family homes that are designed to fit well in the streetscape. Next slide, please. And just for the committee's benefit, this is the site plan illustrating how the two fully conforming single-family homes were planned to be developed on the property. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I just want to take a moment to remind you of the advice that you have received from both your professional planning staff at the City of Ottawa and the expert advice that you received from Julie Harris, both on June 20th and this morning. In the staff report that was before you on June 20th, the conclusion of your professional staff was, quote, as the house at 501 Cole Avenue demonstrates limited historic or architectural value, staff are of the opinion that the property's designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act would not contribute meaningfully to the city's designation program, nor address any gaps in regard to associative or community histories not yet represented through heritage designation. Despite that recommendation from staff, this committee recommended to Planning Committee that the property be designated. Planning Committee accepted your recommendation, and that recommendation rose to Council and was adopted by Council. Here we are back again, and I would remind the committee of the opinion that Mr. McPherson gave you this morning, but it's articulated in the report before you this morning, where staff clearly state the department maintains the position that designation is not recommended for the subject property. In consideration of the advice from your professional staff, in consideration of the advice you've heard from Ms. Harris again this morning, we would urge the subcommittee to adopt recommendation 1B, recommending to council that they withdraw the notice of intention to designate. If you choose instead option 1A, we regrettably will end up before the Ontario Land Tribunal on this matter. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for your comments as well. Does the subcommittee have any questions? And seeing no hands raised, thank you for your submission. The next registered speaker is Jacob Palowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I have very little to add that has not already been articulated by Ms. Harris and Mr. Chown. But I would simply like to remind the committee that as we articulated in our notice of objection, the motion to designate was brought without notice. It was brought without any study in support and against the recommendation of staff. And leaving aside the issue of whether any study is required, as Mr. Chown indicated, that if the city does proceed with designation, we will regrettably end up at the OLT on this. And in such an event, it would be our intention to summon the city's staff as well, and to examine them on the opinion that they've already provided to the committee against designation. And subject to any questions you may have, that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. I suppose not unlike this process that allows an objection, the proper process was also followed in terms of councillor intervention. So I just wanted to point that out. Was there any other questions for this delegate? Seeing none, thank you so much for your comments. And the last registered speaker is Heather Mitchell from the Westboro Community Association.
Hello, committee members. Thank you for seeing me here today. I'm Heather Mitchell with the Westboro Community Association. I'm very disappointed that we do have to be here again today. I'm very appreciative to the owner's team who have made it very clear to you today what their next steps are. Good for them for making that super clear. They are going to take you to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So good to know where we stand. You committee members have already rendered a decision on 501 Cole, agreeing to designate this as heritage property. So has the Planning Committee and full council. However, as is their right, the owner has now appealed the decision. I want to start out by saying that the over 20 neighbors who wrote you letters of support for the designation earlier this summer remain as engaged and as active as ever, and would very much like to see this objections squashed. However, after some discussion, instead of inundating you all with another round of letters and having several people appear today, I had to tell people perhaps it's wiser just to have me. It was decided that I would represent everyone's interest by making a presentation on behalf of the community. I hope I will not let them down. I would draw your attention to the report on the objections where staff has clearly said no new information has been presented. The objections present no new information. You have seen it and you have argued it already. But again, let's go through it. The designation was not justified by any study. Staff has made it clear that the Ontario Heritage Act does not require a designation, requires a study. They don't define what study means. However, let me tell you, there was considerable study conducted by us, the community. Neighbors researched the city archives, reviewed provincial definitions of architectural styles, dived into the history of Nepean, Highland Park and Westboro, and much more. Local historian Dave Alston conducted quite a bit of research, which was presented to you all this summer. The community does not have the money to hire a heritage consultant or architect. Like Ms. Harris, wish we did, but we don't. Staff, Councillor Leeper, and you, committee members, seem to feel this was quite sufficient and you were able to have a good discussion and render a decision based on what we presented. Now to the staff recommendation issue. Despite meeting one of the 3 criteria, which we did meet, staff chose not to recommend designation. However, the fact the committee chose not to agree with staff is, in my view, irrelevant. I know from watching city activities for many years now, staff may recommend or not recommend a course of action or policy, but you councillors ultimately have the final say. You are, after all, representatives of the communities that elected you, and you may have a different view from city staff. This objection seems to infer that staff know better than you do, and you should always therefore agree with them. This is simply not true. You listened to the community, you chose to recommend designation. I hope you will continue to support it. Lack of design or physical value. We have no issue with that. A property may be designated under Section 29 if it meets one or more of the criteria. It meets the criteria of context. We appreciate that there are sexier looking representations of this architectural style in Ottawa, and that was not the meat of our argument. So I'm going to put that aside. Lack of contextual value. Well, that is simply incorrect. This building has great contextual value to the community. Our submission, which staff agree with, made it very clear the building does have strong contextual value and is important to the community. Just to go over the statement of cultural heritage value, it contributes to the area's historic character. It exemplifies Cole's vision, one of buildings that exemplified Cole's vision of a new middle-class area with unfussy, modern homes, trees, and lawns. I'll go over it very quickly if you'll indulge me. As you know, it was built in 1912. In 1931, the house was sold to Albert Morris, who was a significant bureaucrat until the building's annexation to Ottawa in 1950. Then it was the manse of the Highland Park Church, where for many years it was the hub of community activity. In those days, councillors, there was no community centers. There were no shopping malls where people hung out. They hung out at the manse. We, the community, experienced this. It was a significant building for us. As part of a grouping of historic buildings near the corner of Cole and Kenwood Avenues, the building is part of a neighborhood landmark that includes the Cobble Cottage. However, the property indeed by itself is not a landmark. However, if we continue to remove houses that comprise that landmark cluster, there will be no cluster and there will be no landmark. Indulge me just for a few 30 seconds more, councillors. We note that Westboro is one of the only inner city neighborhoods that does not have a heritage district, and very little has been done to date to preserve our heritage properties. Indeed, staff made this statement to you all this summer that they would work with the community to help identify and preserve our local heritage. We've already begun work on this. And on a side note, I'm a little puzzled about the objection, which seems to say two things about its view towards staff. In the first objection articulated, it says we should be following the advice of staff, that is, not to designate. In the third objection, it says we should not be following the advice of staff, that is, that the house has contextual value, but the objection says that it does not. So I'm a little confused. I don't know what the objections are saying. They seem to say two contradictory things about whether we should follow staff or not. Therefore, we respectfully submit the objections hold no merit, and we hope you stand by us and support your original decision to designate 501 Cole as a heritage property. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your comments. Are there any questions for Ms. Mitchell? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that Councillor Moffat has raised his hand.
Thanks. Just with the new section of the Heritage Act and the ability to appeal these types of decisions, do they have a criteria they go by? I mean, we've talked about this before. This committee, heritage value is incredibly subjective. How do you place something that's based on subjectivity in front of a tribunal and expect that you would get the same result depending on who the tribunal members are? I mean, just come to this committee. We all have different opinions. Sometimes when it comes to heritage value of different properties, because it is subjective and there is no specific objective criteria when it comes to heritage value. So in that case, how do we then present this file to the OLT on the basis of subjectivity?
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to pass it over to you, Leslie, to speak to the criteria.
Okay, I'll speak to the criteria, and then if Ms. Enta has anything to add, she can add to it. So the criteria under the Heritage Act through 906, which this committee has heard about many, many times over the years, are the criteria that would be looked at by the OLT as part of the appeal. So the OLT, we haven't had a heritage designation go to the OLT yet. This will be the first one. But the way it is intended to work would be that it would consider whether or not the proposed designation meets the criteria under Regulation 906 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And as you've heard many times, the requirement is to meet one of the three criteria. And so it is staff's opinion that this meets the contextual criteria as we recommended in June. I hope that helps. I'm not the Conservation Review Board, which was the predecessor to the OLT for designation issues, had specialized staff who were experts in heritage conservation matters and heritage valuation. We have been assured that that will also be the case on the OLT, but we have not seen that yet.
Okay, so essentially it's going to come down to a matter of the applicant's interpretation of contextual value versus the city's interpretation of contextual value.
I expect so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Vice Chair Quinn. Oh, and I think you're on mute, Vice Chair Quinn.
My apologies. My question is procedural. I'm just wondering why this has come back to the Built Heritage Subcommittee. I think this is the first time that this kind of an objection has ended up back with us.
So I can explain that, and then maybe I'll pass it over to Christine if there's anything else to add. But through you, Mr. Chair, so this is a new, essentially a revision to the Ontario Heritage Act that came into force following Bill 108. So since January 2021, these have been this process has been within the Ontario Heritage Act. And
Okay,
the reason
that's it. That's good. That's good enough. Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously, that's a very clear rationale for why we're here reconsidering this. So I see that the ward councillor, Councillor Leeper, has raised his hand.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, colleagues. I do need to emphasize this morning that there is no new information that is on the table here. Staff originally agreed that it had this building had contextual value. That is one of the three criteria, and this committee was convinced by the value of that context to the point where it decided to designate, even though our heritage staff had originally determined that it wasn't sufficient enough to designate. And of course, I completely agree with you. The contextual value in this instance is very significant. And it's not just a group of neighbors who have determined that it has contextual value. People who I deeply respect, like Linda Hode and Dave Alston, who do their research, who understand the heritage legislation in the province, they've said this has contextual value. We're not designating very many of these homes that have this value to the community and keeping alive the memory of the roots of Westboro and Highland Park and McKellar Park. And I'm not asking the committee to designate every one of them, but this one is next to the Cobblestone House. It creates a cluster, as Ms. Mitchell described, and nothing has been put on the table since this committee originally recommended we designate it to suggest that its original decision was incorrect. The language that is in the report before you today is extremely clear, and I'm sorry, I just lost it. Heritage staff are of the opinion that the objection received does not provide new or substantive information related to the designation of 501 Cole Avenue. I think it's important for this committee to continue down the path of designating this, and I know that there is a motion prepared as document 3 to this report that would be a vote upon which you could determine to move ahead with the designation. And I am hoping this morning, since you're going to have to put one of those two motions forward, that somebody will put that motion forward and keep this on track. Thank you very much, Chair.
Appreciate those comments, Councillor Leeper. And do any other members of the subcommittee have any other comments on this item? Seeing none, as noted in the report, committee will need to make a recommendation to council to proceed or not with designation. With the will of committee, we will first consider the motion to proceed with designation being document 3 in the report. And I believe that this document is being moved by Vice Chair Quinn. And I believe you're on mute, so Vice Chair. And you're still on mute. If Vice Chair Quinn is having issues, of course, I can always read the motion into.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
There we go.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I think I'd have the hang of this by now. The motion reads as follows. Whereas council issued a notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue on July 7th, 2022, and whereas the objection to the notice of intention to designate was received by the city clerk on August 4th, 2022, and whereas the Built Heritage Subcommittee has considered the contents of the objection through report ACS 2022 PIE RHU 0037, and whereas the Built Heritage Subcommittee continues to find that the building has cultural heritage value as defined in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value attached to the staff report as document 1, therefore be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that council proceed with the designation process under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act through the passage of a bylaw designating the property at 501 Cole Avenue for its cultural heritage value.
Thank you for reading that into the record. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
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 Is the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on October 5th, 2022. Our next item is 5.1. The direction from Member Podolsky to undertake an evaluation of the heritage value of the former CPR rail bridge over the Rideau River. As this is a member's item, there is no staff presentation. Did the mover wish to briefly introduce the item?
Yes, thank you, Chair King. I hope that I am on non-mute. I'm good, thanks. Very briefly, in May of 2022, it came to my attention and attention of others that the City Infrastructure Department were recommending that this CPR rail bridge constructed in 1898 should be replaced rather than rehabilitated because of its physical condition. Very briefly, documentation has kindly been circulated by staff, including the 2018 physical conditions report that gave background on the bridge, analyzed its physical conditions, and had two options for proceeding with the renewal of the bridge. One was rehabilitation, and the second was demolition and replacement. It appears to be more expensive to rehabilitate the bridge, and the recommendation by the infrastructure staff seemed to be based on the assumption that this bridge had no heritage value. And the motion that I have tabled for the Built Heritage Subcommittee is to get the heritage staff to do a heritage assessment of the bridge so that it is clear that if designated, the city's policy towards the future of the bridge should include rehabilitation rather than replacement and reconstruction of a new bridge. Just for the committee's information, in my career, I have worked on 9 landmark bridges, 8 of them in the Ottawa area. And also for the committee's information, not all of our historic bridges, as a matter of fact, the majority of our historic bridges in Ottawa are not designated. This includes the CPR bridge that we're discussing here, but also the Cummings Bridge, the Laurier Avenue Bridge, the Alexandra Bridge, the Prince of Wales Bridge, now known as the Chief Commander Bridge, the Bank Street Bridge, the Dufferin Bridge, Bank Street Bridge over the canal. So all of these bridges that make up Ottawa's identity are not designated. There are some that are. Having said that, I have to say, in my experience, the city's record in conserving its non-heritage bridges is really quite sterling. The work that was done on the Bank Street Bridge and on the Pretoria Bridge, on the Cummings Bridge, and so on and so forth, are all undertaken by the city, even though these bridges were not designated. Having said that, I think that what we have here, I think, is a slight oversight on the part of the infrastructure staff, and the proposal to commence the designation of it or to research it, I think will be helpful to ensure that this portion of our railway heritage will be conserved rather than replaced. So that's a little bit of background on it, and I submit that for the committee's approval, and hope that we support the motion to designate or to commence the study to designate bridge. Thank you very much.
Well, I do appreciate the introduction of this motion, Barry, and we did receive some correspondence on your item. 3 items that came in, including all in support, and items that came in from both Action Sandy Hill as well as the Old Ottawa East Community Association. We do have some registered speakers. I see that a local ward councillor, Councillor Menard, had raised his hand. There will be an opportunity to raise questions to staff and comment after we hear from our registered speakers, starting with David Jeans.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
First, I'd like to thank all the BHSC members for serving on this important subcommittee, particularly those who also served during the last term of council. As a railway historian, I've been particularly interested in this bridge and others for more than 20 years. I'm a member of several railway history organizations, including the Canadian Railroad Historical Association, the Bytown Railway Society, and the Ottawa Railway History Circle. I've also been a board member for over 20 years of both Heritage Ottawa and of Transport Action Canada, which promotes active transportation, though I am speaking as an individual. In 1999, I asked Heritage staff at the old City of Ottawa to consider designating this bridge. At that time, the wooden ties of the original rail deck were removed and handrails were welded to the tops of the bridge girders. The 1898 CPR bridge is one of the oldest surviving railway bridges in Ottawa. It was the first steel girder railway bridge in Ottawa, as all preceding bridges had been truss bridges. It's the oldest surviving railway bridge over the Rideau, Ottawa, or Gatineau rivers. And when I say that, I'm talking about the bridge itself. Other bridges may have been older, but have been replaced over the years. The 65-foot-long plate steel girders came from the Carnegie Steel Company in Pittsburgh and are marked with the Carnegie name. The bridge was one of the first in Ottawa supplied and installed by Dominion Bridge of Lachine, Quebec, before they built the Alexandra Bridge. Therefore, the bridge has design, engineering, and construction significance. The bridge was built shortly before Andrew Carnegie sold his steel interests to Henry Morgan to create U.S. Steel in 1901. The bridge, therefore, represents the accumulation of wealth by Andrew Carnegie, which enabled him to become a major philanthropist, including paying for the construction of the Ottawa Public Library and the Rosemount Library. The bridge was built to give the Canadian Pacific Railway access to Central Station, later Union Station, and to allow their fast trains to Montreal to compete with J.R. Booth's Canada Atlantic Railway. The two lines operated some of the fastest trains in North America. CPR actually built a new class of high-speed passenger locomotives specifically for this route. From 1902 to 1966, the bridge was also part of the route of CPR's transcontinental trains between Montreal and Vancouver, including the famous Dome train, the Canadian. The same bridge also permitted the New York Central Railway to enter Ottawa from 1899 to 1957. So these three uses which I've just described give it historic significance. It was the only one of three railway bridges over the Rideau River at Herdman to survive the closing of Union Station and the opening of the Queensway in 1966. As such, it has become a highly visible landmark seen from the pathway network and from the Queensway. With respect to adaptive reuse as a multi-use pathway, I would like to point out that many hundreds of kilometers of such paths in the National Capital Region, including the Trans-Canada Trail, follow former railway corridors, including bridges. There were once 12 such rail corridors radiating from Ottawa and Gatineau. If every bridge built for railway use had to be rebuilt to meet modern Canadian highway bridge standards, such pathway conversions would become prohibitively expensive. The CPR bridge at Herdman has stood for 124 years and has largely escaped the damage done by road salt to highway bridges. In conclusion, I believe that it will meet at least one and possibly three of the designation criteria under Regulation 906. Based on the consultant's report, it can be made safe to continue in use as a multi-use pathway, but I believe this does not require rebuilding it to meet highway bridge standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions from committee members or council members for Mr. Jeans? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. And the second registered speaker is Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa.
Very much, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good. Okay. I managed to find the right button. I have only a very brief statement. I'm appearing on behalf of our fearless advocacy chair, David Fleming, whom you see frequently. He has he survived Flora, but managed to come down with a cold, and passed on the duty of responding to this item to several of his colleagues. So I decided maybe I should do it. Essentially, we are fully in favor of the motion by Barry Podolsky for the reasons that we stated in a letter that we, or a written communication we sent to at your last meeting in August. So I won't say any more than that. Thank the staff for letting me come in late. Good luck. And as I say, this is a very worthwhile project. David, of course, has outlined all of the technical and historical reasons why you should approve it. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Are there any questions? Seeing none from the committee, thank you so much for your delegation. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that Councillor Menard has raised his hand.
Thank you very much, Chair King, and thanks to Member Podolsky for your work on this and bringing this forward. We're supportive of the direction and motion. I think I do have some questions for city staff, but just wanted to flag as well. This is a well-used bridge at the moment. It wasn't mentioned in comments, but it is well used between 3 different wards, especially, but by many other folks coming from all over the city as an active transportation bridge. So the adaptive reuse of this bridge has been well received by many in the community. I do have some questions that I will ask to staff. So in terms of a heritage review, just what would the timing look like on that? How long would a heritage review take?
Thank you for the question. The direction in the motion is to bring a report forward by the end of Q1 2023. So that would be staff's approach, would be sometime in the winter.
Yeah, just want to make sure you could meet those timelines, if you're okay with them. And we had, and Leslie, we had struck a meeting with local councillors, local community associations and advocates for this bridge several months ago. And we had determined from that point that there would be some more staff contact with those community members. So I'm just wondering, in terms of this direction and motion, that group that we had struck, would that be integrated in this work, or what's the intent of staff in terms of the community members we had brought on board to be part of this process?
I don't think we've worked that out entirely yet. Generally, when we do a heritage evaluation for something like a railway bridge, we would probably contact Mr. Jeans, who you just heard about, and ask him for his expertise. We will undertake our own research, of course, and we would reach out to usually the members of the heritage community, but I think in this broader project where the councillors had brought together a group of community associations, we may also share our findings with them. So we will ensure that it is that we are public along the way with this.
Okay, that's great. And I'm not asking for a firm position, but does staff have any initial insights into the heritage characteristics of the bridge right now, or would you prefer to wait till the report comes back?
Yeah, I don't think I'm ready to provide a professional opinion on that at this point in time because we haven't done the work.
Okay, fair enough. I really appreciate this. I think it would be prudent for the city to undertake an evaluation of the heritage value of the former CPR rail bridge for possible designation. And I think there's obviously very valid heritage considerations that require thoughtful reflection and analysis, and city heritage staff have the knowledge and expertise to conduct this evaluation. So just a thank you again to Member Podolsky, and we look forward to working with staff cooperatively on this into Q1 2023 of next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard, for both your questions and your comments. Are there any other questions or comments to staff on this item? And I don't see any raised hands. I'd also like to thank Member Podolsky for bringing this item to the subcommittee, and also to all the councillors who are obviously positively impacted by this bridge, including Councillor Menard. I see Councillor Fleury. I know that other councillors as well participated in a conversation with community associations expressing their concern about ensuring the examination of the potential preservation of this landmark. So I appreciate all the work that was done. Is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. This report is not rising to Planning Committee or Council, but the recommendation to designate or not for the CPR rail bridge will come forward in 2023, and committee will make recommendations to council at that time. The next item is in-camera items, and there are none. The next item is information previously distributed. The designation refusal reports for the third quarter of this year was circulated. There is no presentation on that item. Number 8 is notice of motions for consideration at a subsequent meeting. We did not receive any notice of motions. Inquiries. There are no inquiries to date. And in terms of other business, there is one planning circulation on the agenda, which was distributed to members prior to the meeting. Members of the public have the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca, and Ontario Heritage Act applications would be considered at a later date. The planning circulation that was sent around referred to a zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control application for 29 Russell Avenue. Is there any other business? Seeing none, on adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. So we're adjourned, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. There are currently no other BHSC meetings scheduled for this term of council. So it was definitely a pleasure serving with all of you, and hopefully we will see each other again, some of us at least, in the new term. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ralston. Great work as chair this term. For me, it's 10 years done and dusted.
And I'd also like to thank our former chair, Chair Gower, for all the contributions that he made during this term.
Chair, do you mind if I say something as well?
Absolutely.
I just want to thank our 4 citizen members of the subcommittee as well. I am privileged to serve in many capacities on many boards with other citizen representatives, and the expertise and contributions of our 4 members has been fantastic. Really, this term of office, we've dealt with a myriad of issues, some quite controversial, and I find that their contributions have really helped me in my thinking and things that I've ultimately brought to council when matters have appeared to council. So to those who question whether or not there's value in having citizen participation, look no further than our subcommittee. It's really been a great experience this term. So thank you.
And I appreciate those comments, Councillor Brockington, and I share them, and I'd like to reflect those as well. I also believe that there's a great technical expertise, as well as the reflection of the community concerns in public members, and I think that that has been strongly demonstrated over this term by our wonderful public members. Their contributions and their inputs have been invaluable to not only this subcommittee, but I believe the city as a whole, in terms of the analysis of issues around heritage. So I really do appreciate those comments. I share those sentiments, and I also want to relay that to our esteemed public members who are bringing the expertise, the needed technical expertise to this subcommittee. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's appreciated. It's been 10 years for me too, Councillor Moffat.
And me too, Councillor Moffat.
But I'm the one leaving. You guys can stick around. You guys can come back next term. I can't.
Oh, that's right. You're on your way.
That was my point. You guys are great.
Okay.
You can stick around. So.
But thank you so much, everybody. And we are adjourned, and it will be interesting to see how heritage files evolve into the next term of council.